Would you like to live with a roommate or with another person 24/7 who's constantly telling you something negative about you? It's our roommate in our mind. That's all about learning to love yourself, which we don't know how. I got into modeling 20 years ago. That was a very different world back then. 90, 60, 90 body standard. As I see it, the fashion and modeling industry is moving towards more authentic, more authenticity, more diversity, more acceptance.
Marta is on a mission to help you create a life that is authentic to you. She has transformed herself from a seasoned model with 20 years of experience to a multifaceted wellness expert as a yoga teacher, nutrition coach, actress, transformational game guide, and a podcaster. She has shared her insight on how to cultivate meaningful relationships, love, and spirituality. Marta, I think you are a spiritual person. And I remember my father telling me this saying that when God closes one door, he opens another door. So it gives me the sense that there's a lot of opportunity around. What made you want to start modeling as your first career?
Well, first of all, thank you for your question. Very glad to be here. What made me? You know what? Looking back at my life, I would say nothing made me. Things were just sort of happening for me, and I was flowing with life. I got into modeling. That was an interesting story. At 13 years old, at school, there was a person who was seeking students for a judo class, and he happened to be dating a beauty queen of our city. And that's how I got into this whole beauty pageant thing and after and the modeling. That was just sort of a natural river of life. I just stepped into it and it led me where it led me.
I heard that modeling is very, how would you say, very hard to get into. What are some requirements to become a fashion model?
First of all, I got into modeling 20 years ago. That was a very different world back then. Very different kind of competition. Right now, things are very different. The standard for becoming a model is very different. Back in the day, there was more of a beauty standard, sort of classic beauty type of standard for a model to become a model. And of course, that standard 90, 60, 90 body standard. Very strict, you know what I mean. But that was the sort of overall standard. And that's how it was 20 years ago. Right now, as I see it, the fashion and modeling industry is moving towards more authentic, more authenticity, more diversity, more acceptance, more perspective on faces and bodies and all inclusive, right? We can say. So that is very different world from modeling world, from the one that I have entered. And it is very different market wise, because of course that made the competition 1,000, 1,000,000 times stronger, as well as the standard for becoming a model less rigid, way, way less rigid.
Wow, seems like two parallel worlds. And speaking of diversity, I remember you told me this really awesome story about the butterfly and the cocoon, how it leads to your self-discovery and self-growth. Can you just tell us again to our listeners that amazing story?
The butterfly story, it's a fascinating one to me, and I deeply relate to it because I look at my life as a human metamorphosis. And I see that in the other people's lives too, as they progress on their journey of life, so does the butterfly, as we all know that the butterfly doesn't come into this world as a butterfly. It starts off as a caterpillar and it crawls on earth. It cannot fly, and it's a very different creature in terms of its looks and its ability. But then when the time comes, when a certain time arrives, we all know that a caterpillar goes into cocoon, and then while in the cocoon, it undergoes falling apart and getting back together as a new creature, right? The metamorphosis of a butterfly. And then and only then we can see and witness and appreciate the beauty of the butterfly. But what I didn't know, and I bet you didn't know before I told you, and maybe your listeners don't know, that while undergoing that transformation, falling apart, growing wings, right? It's a totally different creature that is getting born in the cocoon. When it's growing at wings, because it's in the cocoon, and the wings are, just say that in English, they're not spread, right? How do you, sorry, I'm missing the word. What would be the word? The wings are folded, right?
Right.
The wings are folded. So they're like this. And in order for the butterfly to get out of the cocoon, it needs to break it. It needs to push and kick in order to break the walls of the cocoon. And apparently, what I didn't know, that's a painful process. And say you would find out that this little creature is in pain, is trying to break free from that cocoon. And as a compassionate person, out of the beauty of your heart and the kindness of your heart, you'd want to help her, the butterfly, break out. And you'd break it out too soon. What would happen to a butterfly? It would not develop enough strength in its wings. And therefore, it wouldn't be able to spread her wings and fly. So it would just fall out and die slowly. While where we think that we could save someone or something from the suffering, it appears to be actually a deep meaning in that suffering, in that struggle. So I was deeply moved by this story, and I realized that my struggles and my suffering had deep meaning behind it. And in fact, it did. Now, looking back at my life and my metamorphosis, or as I call it, Martamorphosis, that struggle, that suffering was deeply meaningful. It made me into who I am today. And without it, I wouldn't be able to get all this experience, get all this strength, but also softness to my being, to how I am and who I am.
That story reminds me of this analogy. Grapes must be crushed to make wine. Diamonds form under pressure. You have to be in this environment that pushes on you in order to be a stronger being. Now I see that you are
Exactly.
an enlightened person. What would you have done differently when looking back to your life?
Not a single thing. But I am nowhere near to being enlightened. Please don't call me that. I believe self-improvement and spiritual growth is a lifelong journey. Also thinking that today's world is a little bit over flooded with gurus and teachers and everybody who knows how to live your life. I am a firm believer that you are, I am, and every single human being and living being on the planet Earth is born with an inner teacher, inner guidance. It's just that we get cut off from our own authentic expression early on. Your listeners perhaps could find in the work of Gabor Mate. I love this. I call him teacher because I learned a lot from him, but he's actually a medical doctor and a writer and a speaker. And he talks about attachment versus authenticity, the conflict between authenticity and attachment. And this is how, if you go and check out that little clip where he explains that, it's probably a 5-minute clip or something, but it perfectly explains how and why we lose that connection to ourselves, to our inner guidance. And then we go out in the world and try to find other people to tell us, to teach us how to live our lives. And that's why we suffer. So our healing journey is basically find our way back to our own inner guidance, inner teaching, inner wisdom.
I like that originality. This is a perfect question for you. How to live a healthy life for both the mind and body?
Stop judging yourself and become really good at forgiving yourself. We are incredibly judgmental creatures, starting with ourselves and then continuing with everyone else. But that is incredibly destructive and unhealthy for ourselves and for the others. Come on, go judge someone and you'll see if you have a good relationship with them. So forgiving yourself first and then forgiving others for doing the same mistake you do, that definitely brings a whole other level of health into your life. But I call that basically, that's all about learning to love yourself, which we don't know how.
I like that. It's almost like putting a diet restriction on negative words. It's like dieting, but for your spoken words.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It ain't easy. It ain't easy, but it's absolutely worth it.
It's
Because
absolutely worth it.
that's the world that you live in. You live in here, up here, in your head a lot of the time, in your mind. Unless you learn to live more in your heart and not in your head, then your mind environment is so, so important. Would you like to live with a roommate or with another person 24/7 who's constantly telling you something negative about you?
No, I
Of
wouldn't.
course not. You'd hate them. You'd say, "Get out. I don't want to live with you." So, but that's what's happening. That's our roommate in our mind.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I never thought of that.
Yeah.
And
That's the guy you live in 24/7, 7 days a week, every month, 12 months a year, your entire life. So you better teach them
to be
some
nice.
positive thinking, to be nice, to be loving, you know?
Wow. I think that's a wonderful key takeaway. Your mind is your roommate. You have to teach them to be nice.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you
So
so much.
you can have a lovely life experience.
Lovely life experience. Wonderful. Thank you
Yes.
so much, Marta. It has been an absolute pleasure talking with you. Thank you so much for your amazing lessons. I think our listeners will learn a lot from your experiences.
Thank you, Jerry. My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.